Right, I just thought seeing a number of you in the room would have no doubt have been interviewed as part of the market research survey that was conducted by a company by the name of Ipsos, that it would be worth just going through quickly and updating you about why we had done this survey, what the outcomes of it have been, what the findings were. So the survey was conducted across both users of genetic evaluation technology, non-users of those technologies, and across both the seed stock and the commercial sectors for both beef and sheep. And basically what we were trying to do, I guess, one is better inform our extension and adoption strategies. Why do we, where are we missing the point, I guess, with our current extension methods to get increased adoption. The other one is so that in a few years' time, when they come back to say, so have I been successful in helping drive doubling the rate of genetic gain across the country, we've got some metrics to base some of those assessments on. So I guess in a way the people who have contributed to that survey have helped stitch me up in a few years' time. So the exact specific objectives, I guess, help identify what decision-making tools breeders are using when making genetic selection decisions, how they're using those tools, establish what motivates producers to use genetic tools, explore what would encourage greater uptake or greater adoption of those technologies in different businesses, and actually come up with some hard and fast measurements of what the incidence of those motivators or barriers might be. So this was done across breed plan, users and non-users, Landplan and Moreno Select as three different categories. So there was a qualitative and a quantitative part to this. So there was a qualitative version that was done a couple of years ago that went into really detailed discussions with a small number of people. The more recent survey was a quantitative survey that's looked across a much broader number of people to try and come up with some specific metrics around a lot of the things that we're interested in. So I won't go into too much detail with exactly everything that's on this slide, but the sample size I think is important. There was over 2001 to be specific, producers contacted as part of this survey. In the end, there was 1,031 cattle producers and 794 sheep producers that responded. Took people over 21 minutes to go through it. Just if you were sitting there thinking to yourself it took like half an hour to get through that, no, you're exaggerating. It was 21.6 minutes. And a little bit of a breakdown for you there across the different sectors for Moreno Select, Landplan, breed plan, commercial and seed stock, whether people were using the technology or not. So this is all based on the responses that they gave us. So if someone answered the phone and were asked, are you the person that makes the main breeding decisions in the business? Yes, and then the next question, seed stock or commercial, well, I breed a few rams, but my main business is commercial. Some of them have gone through as commercial breeder responses when it would have been more effective for us as seed stock. But still, it's given us some really useful information. A little bit short on some of the non-user feedback for seed stock breeders, but still enough to get what we needed out of it. To jump into what some of the results looked like, in terms of rate of genetic progress and asking people, are you satisfied with your current rate of genetic progress? There really wasn't a major difference. So the top bar there is Moreno Select seed stock user. The next one is Moreno seed stock non-user. So they're paired as you go down. So then you've got commercial user and non-user for Morenos. You've got seed stock for Landplan, user, non-user, and so on. So you can see there that for most of those categories, there wasn't significant differences in whether people were actually satisfied with their rate of progress or not. The only one that really stands out from the crowd is the Moreno seed stock. People who are in Moreno Select were more satisfied, I guess, with their rate of progress. But in general, there's not a large amount of difference. And I don't know, maybe the cynic in me is going, well, ignorance is bliss perhaps, but it's really hard to encourage someone to pick up a new technology or a new way of doing something when they're not dissatisfied with the results that they're getting at the moment. So in terms of, once someone said that if they said that they were less than really satisfied with the rate of progress that they're making at the moment, the next question that was asked is why? You know, what are the reasons why you're not fully satisfied? And I think in general, the most common response across a range of categories was slow rate of change. So you do see that as a response for, in this case, some Moreno Select seed stock people, you know, using the genetic evaluation gave that sort of response. It's a much more prevalent response in some of the other areas. So for the non-users, I'd probably say, well, if you use Moreno Select, you'd probably get higher rates again, you'd be more satisfied, but you know, it's a bit of a common theme. Again, you see it in Landplan, you know, where people are saying that there's always room for improvement, for example. And I know that there's a large number of people in this room who over the years have been giving me a hard time saying that they want to make more genetic progress and they want us to come up with ways of helping them do it. So in a lot of ways, that's really what drives us forward, is people demanding more out of systems. But for people who are not currently using the system, you know, I think you saw a little bit more of that for the commercials. But in the seed stock sector who aren't using it, you know, slow rate of change featured, but there seems to be a whole lot of areas where people aren't really giving you much of a clear response, which is interesting. And I think we probably need to break this down into those two categories, because one of those categories, you know, the sort of potential clients for me to be thinking about how do I get them involved in genetic evaluation. The other category is potential clients for you guys sitting in the room. You know, how do we think about getting people who are not currently buying RAMs based on ASBVs to buy RAMs based on ASBVs? So, you know, if they're not dissatisfied with how they're currently doing business, or, you know, they're not really sure what's driving their rate of gain or holding it back, you know, how do we tap into those people and make sure that we start being able to explain the technology better? So, bit of a summary of that part of it for genetic progress. Users of genetic programs like Landplan and Moreno Select did tend to have much clearer breeding objectives, but it wasn't a major difference. So people who are not in Landplan or Moreno Select still have breeding objectives. I'd potentially call them breeding subjectives occasionally, just thinking about how they might be worded, but you know, people know where they're wanting to go. That's not necessarily what the difference is. Users of genetic programs had a wider range of metrics that they were interested in and were less reliant on basic assessments, so more interested in a wider range of traits, not so much in you know, how heavy was this animal, what was its actual muscle depth measurement, for example. For most categories, satisfaction with genetic gain wasn't clearly related to whether you're in an evaluation or not. So, as I said, it has a bit of an impact on how we go forward and include that in adoption campaigns. This one is a little bit of an interesting one, I think. In general, it's really good news, but what this is trying to do is trying to illustrate what people's perceptions of some of the different components are. So starting at the bottom there and working your way up, you know, how familiar are you with the genetic evaluations and what they do? So that's based on, you know, when you were asked some random questions about, you know, who actually runs Landplan, and if you gave them a vague answer of, oh, it's those guys up in the Armidale Mafia, you probably got somewhere towards saying that you were in some way familiar. Favourable, you know, did you say nice things or not? Did you trust it? And would you advocate the use of it to other people? So you can see there across people who are using Landplan or Moreno Select in some way, those results are really quite favourable. You know, things are viewed quite well, but there's an interesting point in it, particularly here, where in the commercial sheep breeders who use Landplan, you can see there only 51% of them are familiar with it, 81% favourable, 80% trust it. That's what the researchers doing this work were referring to as blind trust. So yeah, we think this is great, you should use it, but they don't know much about it. And that was seen as being pretty risky for us in terms of, it's great that you've got people out there who trust what you're providing them with and are happy to use it, but it's a risk in that if someone else comes along telling them a different story, they might be reasonably easy swayed because they don't understand the full background behind it. So mostly good news, but there is a little bit of risk, and it means that we still do need, obviously, to do more extension work within those groups of people who are using sheep genetic services to some degree. Perceptions continued on, and one of the major reasons why people don't use it is that they've just never got around to it. Kind of says that they don't really see the value of why they should be doing it. So you'll see there the biggest reasons for seed stock people not using it. You know, I use a different recording system. In other words, I run them over the scales, or I measure eye muscle depth, and I just compare them on that. You know, I've got another way of comparing things, or the other ones I never got around to it, was featuring on the commercial side as well. So for you guys trying to sell rams to people, you know, who've just never been bothered informing themselves about how breed plan works or Landplan works, you know, where's the value proposition for them? Similarly, for Moreno Select, the biggest reason for people not doing it, they just never got around to it. So, you know, we still obviously need to do a lot of work in, you know, where's the business proposition, where's the value proposition for people to say, you know, there is a better way of doing this and driving profitability in my flock. So I think, you know, it does say to us that, you know, there's a pretty reasonable proportion of the industry who just say, why would I bother? What I'm doing now is good enough, sort of thing. So in terms of the key learnings from the perception part of it, so users do trust Landplan and Moreno Select. Commercial users in particular, there is a bit of an issue with that trust being blind to some extent. I didn't put up the non-user stuff, but that did suggest that non-users don't very often even know enough to start trusting the system. So users and non-users do say similar things, just to different degrees. You know, people are aware that, you know, it's a database that helps you makes decisions about breeding programs. Biggest complaints really, process is hard to understand, particularly issues around data capture, accuracy, quality of information. And some of the main reasons people were citing as not using the system, other than what I've already said, people not using it because they believe other people are too reliant on figures. You know, most non-users didn't cite any reasons, so that's kind of an interesting thing. There's no real barrier to it. They're not opposed to it as such. They just haven't seen a good enough value proposition for them to get involved. Now, I had dropped some of these out in the interest of time, but I'll quickly speak to them. Training and skills development I thought was quite interesting, but obviously if you look across the list there, Landplan users, well, I think the main message to distill out of it really is that most people, whether they're Moreno Select or Landplan clients, tend to prefer to get their information from other breeders, consultants, classes. So you guys are actually our best tool for getting information out there to industry. Most people would prefer to talk to you over a beer at a barbecue about Landplan or Moreno Select than come and listen to me talk. Who would have figured? Similar for the Merinos, obviously, classes do feature a little bit higher there. The difference between how many people had gone and actually done some proper training or had more formal guidance in how to use technologies was another thing. So you've got, for the Landplan users, 61% of seed stock people had some training in genetics. The non-users down to 23%. And for Merinos, 86% had training. None of the non-users had training at all. So, I think while generally people prefer to get their information from others, those who are seeking out information, we've got a much higher incidence of people being well informed in those using the systems. And the other part of that, I guess, was that majority of them were saying that they had gone to sheep genetics, Landplan people, Moreno Select people for that training, and a few others. So I think it's interesting down the bottom there where it says other. I think you probably find you've got obviously more commercial people there saying they've done some training, not really sure who's delivered it, and that probably reflects some of our delivery models with Ram Select workshops, bred well, fed well workshops, that sort of thing. I might just, again, if people are coming to find training, who do they prefer to get training from? And I think there was a reasonably clear message there that stud breeders, their expectation is that they should go to sheep genetics for training in genetics issues, but commercial breeders were saying, the majority of them, that they should go to MLA. And I think it was about 25% of Merino, 26% of Merino breeders saying AWI for training in those areas. So key findings, most popular way for sheep meat producers to get genetics information is from colleagues, classes, agents, breeders. Sheep genetics most common trainers. We are expected to provide that service, but commercial breeders expect to go to MLA. Again, that issue of, I'm not sure whether it's apathy or whether it's just lack of motivation, but most people are just saying that if they haven't had training, they just haven't got around to it. Usually reflects that they're disinterested or not motivated to do it. And there's all sort of little things popping up here that I'd fixed in the other version, but anyway. So desired behaviour change, suggesting obviously that we need to remove the mystery, better explain the metrics, how it's used in the evaluations. And I really should, on that front, removing the mystery, I should congratulate Ferg on his talk before. He didn't say black box once, and I think that's a really big step forward. People have this perception that Landplans, Moreno Select are a black box. No one really knows what happens inside it. So good work, Ferg. You've really progressed over the last couple of years. It's good to see. Ensure the system is easy and routine to use. Ensure that the genetic and financial payback is easy to model and track. So, we still need to obviously demonstrate a better business proposition where the money comes from. A bit like, Jerry Maguire, show me the money. Highlight peace of mind that comes from selecting for reducing the incidence of unwanted traits. So there was feedback suggesting that a lot of people are more interested in using it to manage traits that they don't want or they don't want more of, as opposed to actually using it to drive progress for other traits that they do want. So some of the conclusions that these are the consultants' conclusions that have come out of this work, not mine. Producers do get the value of genetics-based breeding and purchasing. Confirmed, obviously, I think a lot of things that we already knew, but producers do value and track their genetic gains. It's just that different people do it in different ways, and Some, I hope, are more effective than others. They do make breeding and purchase decisions on the intent to improve genetic quality. They do have more positive than negative impressions of Breedplan, Landplan, Moreno Select. So, you know, I think that is a good thing. Every now and then you have someone suggesting, do we need to go rebranding all this stuff and doing all that sort of thing. You know, generally, impression in industry is positive, so that's good. They do know where to get training, but equally satisfied with, you know, on the sort of progress they're making. On the downside, there is the feeling coming through, I guess, that for the investment that people make in terms of effort and so on, that there's perhaps not a big enough payoff. And you know, some of the recommendations there were making sure that there's a full range of traits that individual breeders value and record. And I think a lot of that was probably driven more by the northern beef industry, where people are really, you know, wanting to make sure that these animals are structurally sound enough that they can, you know, walk for bloody hundreds of kilometres and all that sort of thing. But it does still hold true, I guess. There's plenty of traits that we subjectively assess that are important to people's breeding programs. How do we start including them in genetic evaluations? And, you know, time and complexity and effort involved in data capture and data access. So what do we need to do to simplify those processes as much as possible? That's obviously going to be one of the things we try addressing with our database redevelopment project that we'll be hoping to start before too much longer. And the trait management thing that I've already mentioned, where, you know, some people view it as more of an insurance policy against negative outcomes. So in terms of some of the final recommendations, broken down into 3 categories: changing the tools, so making data entry easier and more accurate. As I said, we'll try and handle some of that in our database redevelopment. Enabling users to record those other traits that are of importance to them, increasing the amount of financial modelling or proof of profit sort of information that's out there, and deal with some of the myths that are out there. Back across the other side, in terms of changing industry, trying to make it more that these tools are ubiquitous, they're across the industry, they're just the standard part of business. Changing the messages, you know, these are things that we've already been working towards, I guess, but you know, recommendations that we need to do more work in that area. You know, it's got to get to the stage where the use of this sort of technology is just industry standard and it's expected. A proven way of helping people meet their business goals, easy to see financial and genetic payback and so on. So. You know, as I said, there are a range of things that we are already working towards, but a lot of this information is going to better inform our adoption and extension strategy that we have been developing for genetics across both beef and sheep, and that we will be looking at pulling an implementation plan together very soon, so that, you know, we've got more of a framework there with coordinated efforts to deliver a lot of that information. So it's not that this survey was something nice that you then sit on a shelf somewhere to collect dust. It is actively informing a couple of the major projects that we've got coming up that we'll be working on over the next few months.